So, moving right to left, Milenko Matanovic. See, I knew I'd screw that up. Milenko I met last summer. I was photographing him along with Tim Matsui, who's here taking pictures of us, another BEA board member. And Milenko has a wonderful little organization called Pomegranate Center. They engage communities like nobody I've ever seen before. They do design build projects that are a direct outgrowth of Milenko's history as an artist. They've been doing this successfully since 1986. It's a wonderful, tiny little organization based out in Issaquah. And I heard Milenko speak at one of their events, and I thought, I want to get this guy at our thing, because he's got it, he understands. So you're going to get to hear about that. And Jane Sutton-Redner is with World Vision. That's an organization I'll bet everybody in the room has heard of. They have been around for a long time. It's a faith-based organization based down in Federal Way. They're doing fantastic work on all kinds of huge issues around the world. They touch everything. They do it from their heart. Jane has gone from the print side all the way up through new media, and it sounds like she's got a lot of cows that she's trying to corral right now down there in media terms, so she's going to talk about that. Dan Green, Dan was, before he came out to Seattle here to join us, he was a executive producer at Nightline, right? Senior producer. Is that better than executive producer? No. No, well, if you stuck around longer.
I know.
And so he's been on both sides of this. He's now with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You had a stop on the way at an organization that set up programs for nonprofits, as I understand it. What the name of that was?
Homefront.
Homefront. So send your business cards to them. Yeah. And he's seen it from all those different perspectives. And now Dan sort of runs the partnerships and runs the stable of creative talent and sets up media partnerships, as I understand it. Each of these folks is going to show you some stuff, and then we'll talk. Okay. You want a mic? Give this man a microphone.
Hi. Help me find mine. I'm really glad to be here. I'm an artist, and I believe I share with you this idea, basic idea of the arts. You try to squeeze large concepts, large ideas into tiny little spaces. You know, whether you do it with poetry, or in your case, many of you with pictures, or in my case, with gathering places, it's still a lot of squeezing that goes on. And tightening. Okay. Folks, as you can see from this, there was some lousy translation from my computer to this computer, but what you'll see are some really bad pictures, because our organization, being very small, we did not have any photographers, professionals on staff until very recently. I'll show some pictures from a project in Walla Walla. So what you see is the end result of the work that started like this. In our methodology, you consult the community where you work right at the beginning. The end users are the vision makers. It's so easy to come into a situation and prescribe a remedy for a given community. In our methodology, we consult with the community. In this instance, from a group of people who were in this room, we heard that in a corner of an existing park called Washington Park, drugs are being dealt, and they wanted to remove that function from the park and replace it with something more positive. We asked, what is something more positive? In this instance, the community wanted 4 things: a dance floor, a promenade, colors, and picnic tables. That's it. And they believe by replacing the existing drug dealing with those kind of functions would do the work of social remediation. We took their ideas into our studio, We created models that were floated in the park so other people could imagine what was being proposed by the community. Young people created banners. Older members created larger banners. Parks Department Director on the left worked with us, so in our methodology, the city government and community are not two different entities, they are all members of the same community and they should be a part of the leadership team. And then we involve people in the making of this place, so there is a lot of very heavy labor. So we combine basically three ideas: participatory democracy, design and art making, and barn raising, or a more noble variation of that, cathedral building. And so our goal is to create something in a community that has a lasting impact on the fabric of that community, a gathering place. And gathering place is different from parks in that it must be for all generations and all kinds of events, from private enjoyment to large celebrations. At the end, those small banners the children create are displayed at the entryway into the park, and you have this place that borrows from the imagery of hops fields, which are abundant in that part of the world, but everything is carved, everything is touched by people who worked with us, because we think that depositing one's care into a physical environment is one of those things we've forgotten how to do. So every column is carefully and attentively cared for. So that gives you an idea of a journey. Some other projects this last year, and Tim, this is one of Tim's photos here, benches that had to be removed from the space, so they are wheelbarrow benches with salvaged bicycle wheels, so you can roll them away. But when you roll them together, it creates another image, in this case, wings of an osprey. Or taking an abandoned alleyway in Sumner and turning it into something that has a lot of social cohesion. Or taking a corner of an existing park in Kirkland and turning it into a place where people can have outdoor gatherings and festivals and kids can play. So, what we do, what we developed is this very intense, very fierce project that asks people to take charge of their neighborhoods and rearrange some physical aspect of that neighborhood, but in the process they rearrange their social cohesion. So how often these people that you see in the picture would be, for the first time, would get to know each other in the process of doing something for their community. Right now we are involved with this project in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, a tornado-ravaged community, and we're using mainly salvaged materials, wood from trees that fell down, and concrete pads from basements of the homes that disappeared. So that gives you a sense of what I do. I'm looking forward to converse with the two of you later on. Thanks.
Hi everybody, I'm Jane, and I have a very basic PowerPoint that could just run while I'm talking. And really, it'd be great if you looked there instead of at me. Okay, I'm with World Vision, and because we're somewhat local, 2 hours south from here, hopefully you know a little bit about us, but we are a Christian humanitarian organization. We're in nearly 100 countries, 44,000 staff worldwide work for World Vision. More than 3 million children across the globe are assisted by sponsors. We responded to 75 emergencies in 2011. Our microloan portfolio is currently $361 million. In the last decade, World Vision has drilled more than 2,000 clean water wells and provided access to water for more than 1.5 million people in 10 countries in Africa. Last year, World Vision used $70 million in food grants to provide the equivalent of 3,300 semi-truck loads worth of food for children and families. Just use that as a visual of all these huge semi-trucks. And last year, in 2011, the US office raised $1 billion, more than half in private cash contributions. But what I want to tell you is that all of this started with a story. And would you like to hear the story? Okay. I hope so, because that's what I was going to do with my 5 minutes. Well, it all started with a child and a challenge. The child was a girl in China in need. The challenge was a question, the kind that cannot go unanswered. What are you going to do about it? This question gave Bob Pierce nowhere to go. The young American evangelist was only indirectly responsible for the child's distress. He had preached to the girl, whose name was White Jade, at her school, and God had moved in her heart. But the result? She was beaten, thrown out of her home. And though a Dutch Reformed missionary was there to catch White Jade's fall, the woman couldn't support the child herself. She put Bob on the spot. Bob did do something about it. He emptied his pockets to pay for the child's care. It was about $5. And he pledged more. And a few years later, armed with his camera, his radio microphone, his films, his photos, and eyewitness accounts from far-flung locales, he started World Vision in 1950, an organization to care for the white shades of the world. Others came behind Bob, fanning out to the world's most troubled places. Overwhelmed by the need, these men and women of many nationalities first slumped to their knees and prayed. Then they asked themselves, what are you going to do about it? The answers came by a boat to rescue refugees in the South China Sea, work around the clock to save starving children in Ethiopia, rebuild homes and schools after catastrophes, cuddle unloved orphans in post-communist Europe, fill medicine shelves and empty hospital beds, rehabilitate child soldiers, embrace AIDS outcasts, lobby powerful governments, mobilize college students, equip pastors. Meanwhile, in millions of homes across the developed world, families placed children's photos on their refrigerators to signify the child's place in their hearts. Here, amid warmth and comfort, where water flowed clean and food was never hard, the face of a child from a distant, disadvantaged land served as a daily reminder that things were not the same everywhere. That poverty was a reality, that it wasn't their fault, but it was their responsibility, that they could do something about it. A child in a challenge, 60 years, 62 actually, after Bob Pierce founded World Vision, these are still the catalysts for people to care and to act. People read their Bibles and they know God's heart for the poor. They want to help, but may not always know exactly how, especially when the problem seems so complicated, the statistics so staggering. World Vision brings it back to the child. With roots in nearly 100 countries, World Vision communicates about deprived children, the modern white jades, and asks a willing world, what are you going to do about it? As long as there's a child in need, this challenge remains. So that's our story. And today, really, because of Bob Pierce, storytelling is really deep in our DNA. And we've got some of the samples show it. Magazines, newsletters, curriculum, direct mail, books, reports. We have websites. We have a new iPhone app. Videos, experiential exhibits, photography exhibits, live stream events, conferences, vloggers and bloggers trips, short film, social media, Facebook, Twitter, Flickr, Pinterest, all of that. But of course, our success in all of those ventures is really the extent to which we can tell that same story of a child in a challenge.
So again, my name is Dan Green, and I work at that little foundation not far from here, up the road. So a little bit, just a bit about the background and how I come to this. I ended up leaving journalism in 2008 after the election because I had started talking to a lot of nonprofits and foundations. I started working overseas as a journalist, started talking to a lot of nonprofits and foundations about the fact that places like Nightline were no longer going to be eager recipients to all the proposals around the world to go help tell their stories because our budgets actually weren't going to be able to accommodate that. And we were closing foreign bureaus everywhere. And so the landscape was changing rapidly, and Before I knew it, I decided, well, maybe it was time to jump and work with a small communications firm that works with nonprofits and foundations. And I started something called the Content Project there at the end of 2008. And that was specifically to work with nonprofits and foundations on helping them figure out how they were going to tell their own stories and then distribute those, because hiring PR firms to continue to pitch stories was probably not the most effective thing for them to do. And one of the first projects and one of the first clients that I ended up getting, and I just wanted to start there, was the Living Proof Project. And the Living Proof Project turned out to be something that was funded by the Gates Foundation. And so for anybody who wants to go on and see those, you can now see that the one campaign inherited the Living Proof Project. But it was really a lot of what we ended up doing is trying to work with a lot of grantees of the Gates Foundation to help them tell stories. And the challenge quickly we figured out was, and for those of you who understand storytelling a lot better, you probably are quite experienced with this if you've worked with nonprofits. And from the last presentation of those case studies, what we realized fairly quickly, and I realized, is that these nonprofits were very receptive to the idea of storytelling. They use the word all the time. They want to be better storytellers. They understand the power of it, and that it's a huge force multiplier for them. And it's just the how-to is a real struggle. And we ended up having to really break it down for people, which was I ended up having to break it down in a multiple stage process to think about, which was kind of the discovery process, which is they knew they wanted to do storytelling, but they're not kind of programmed to know a great story when they see one. So even when they have people out in the field, it isn't that easy for those people. When you said storytelling matters, please send us in your stories, wasn't so easy. I met with USAID at the time that decided they were going to become great storytellers, and they set up a training for everybody out in the field at their embassies who were communications people, and they required you to submit stories. They even created a format for it, which is said, here's your headline, here's your sub-headline, it has a paragraph, submit one photo of the person actually doing something, not just staring at the camera and smiling and waving. And they tried to get people to submit these stories, and when I met with them at the end of 2008, I said, how's it going? And they said, not very well at all. I said, why not? They said, well, probably 1 out of 10 people actually have taken to this and can actually do it. And so what they realized fairly quickly is they still needed professionals to do it. You couldn't just hand out cameras and do a training session and say, go do it and go tell some great stories. Because these nonprofits and foundations wanted great stories. So I think Russell was right that the quality really mattered to folks. They weren't that interested in just, let's give all of our staffs flip cameras and see what they get and bring it back. A lot of organizations tried that and noticed fairly quickly that they didn't get the kind of quality they were hoping for. Once in a while you'd find somebody who was great. So we ended up realizing that we had to create a discovery process to help find the stories, and that actually professionals on the outside were better than even folks on the inside, but you could try to get people to try to find them. So we went through a discovery process. Then the design, the development part of the process, which was actually then telling the story, getting good photos or getting video or getting imagery or actually writing it in a way that was compelling was absolutely essential. Again, they needed some outside support and help. 1 out of 10 people that you might train, 2 out of 10 people would do it, but a lot of the others didn't. And then the big conundrum of distribution came, which was, I think a lot of these folks realized, even if we hired outsiders to go find stories and create the stories, if we just stuck them up on our website, that didn't have a lot of impact. And then they started to think, well, how are we going to actually get these things out there? And then there were 2 other elements that I think Russell touched on, but these are kind of important areas that are worth remembering. And the next one was engagement. And I use that term because I think I now manage media grant making at the foundation, so I don't really oversee the content creation, although I work very closely with the folks who do create some of the content. Every media organization that I go with, the word that they're always coming up with and we're always talking about is we're struggling with engagement, right? We understand that our job now, even as major media organizations, is no longer to just inform people, but to engage them. And we're trying to figure out what that means, what that looks like, how are we going to do that? And even when you go around to cutting-edge institutions, even the MIT Media Lab, they're studying participatory media, which is how we're going to actually get people to engage. And when I sat down with the head of interactive media at the New York Times, his argument to me was, we're really trying to even start thinking about engagement first, story second. which is what is it, if we were going to create something and engage our community more deeply, and we thought about what that was first, and then we told the story second, let's see what would happen. And they've had some really interesting success when they've done that. They did it around the Oscars this past year, where they decided to create a platform to engage people in being able to fill out a pool and tell their own stories. I say that because with most of these organizations, and ours as well, a huge area that is trying to figure out what is the call to action, what is the deeper engagement, what is it that when you give people great stories, what are they supposed to do with that information? And there are a lot of organizations out there now, and even participant media and take part in an organization called Purpose and others that say, don't tell stories and then just leave people with, oh wow, that was a really nice story. You waste really valuable emotional energy that you've now gotten people to engage with. Give them something that they're not supposed to do with that information. And I just say that to say that's something to be thinking about. And as Russell pointed out in that last step, besides engagement, is that everyone talks about is kind of measurement. And so the measurement part of it is key. So as you guys are thinking about, talking about this, understanding even just telling it an anecdotal story, like the story that I think Benjamin and Sarah told about in the prison, that now he's a beekeeper, those little individual success narratives of a part of what you do with those stories and the ultimate impact on those stories for nonprofits is huge. It isn't just, we told these great stories and we put them up there, but then what did someone do with them? What impact did they have? I'm not sure I want to take too much time playing any of these. I mean, you can see this is from 3 years ago when we started the Living Proof Project. All I'll say is, part of this, if I play a little bit of it, you'll see fairly quickly, we tried to merge, let's just play for a second.
It took me 9 years to get pregnant. I was 7 months pregnant. But all of a sudden my blood pressure was just high. The doctors said the case was very serious. They decided to deliver through operation. The chances were just 50-50 to be alive or not. Can you imagine after 9 years without a child? It wasn't too good. Was born at 820 grams. She was less than a packet of sugar. It's when some nurses advised me to go for mother care. I went there. My child started growing. She was adding grams every day. When a baby is premature, needs 3 important things. That is heat, food, and love. You provide heat with skin contact. You provide food easily. When the baby is here, the love is also there. There's strong bondage between you and baby.
So you'll see, it's about 1 more minute of the video, and you'll see that you'll finally meet that this woman's daughter survived, and she's now 3 years old, and you see her today as 3 years old. It was a little 2.5 minute story. The part of that really resonated, obviously, we did still photos as well as the video, and the still photos were huge for distribution. What I'll say is, the power of these stories was that woman ended up, not only did Reuters and other traditional media organizations gravitate and told her story, but she ended up testifying for Congress about kangaroo mother care. So when you find individual stories that are very powerful, these organizations have figured out ways to try to do more with them. to get them out and to use these photos. You'll see that part of, if you go onto the Gates Foundation website, we really tried to start experimenting with creative storytelling in different ways. So you'll see, if you go to our water, sanitation, and hygiene section, there's an animation about reinventing the toilet that's had over 200,000 views between our site and YouTube and others. And so we're always looking for creative storytelling ways that we can somehow or another try to engage people in these issues in different manners.
Coming at it, you all come at it from very different perspectives, right? We've got a huge grant funding organization that doesn't do direct service. You go direct to your funders and spend the money directly as where you see the need, and you are working at this very granular level, building community like one, shovel full at a time, really. Yeah. So, where do you guys? What is the overarching similarity that you all saw in each other's work that connected you all when you were looking there? Malika, why don't you?
What you said, I think. Engage first, story second. I think that's what we adopted to begin with. Because our work combines so many different aspects, there's sustainability, there's building materials, recycling, there's community building, there's hands-on education, mentoring. All that is rolled into our model. It's really hard to tell that broad story. And so in initial years, we just said, let the projects speak for themselves. That basically, our gathering places are our photos, if you wish. And let other people take that. It's only in recent years that we got corporate support from Tallis Coffee, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, and they allowed us to start documenting this. So Tim is helping us with videos and photos. And we have, for the first time, an opportunity in 25 years to tell that story beyond the story that we told just naturally as life, So, but I like this idea that something needs to come first. Story will not replace meaning. It can capture glimpses of that meaning, but it cannot replace it. So I believe in the integrity of work first, and then storytelling flows out of that.
And one of the things I found impressive about what you're doing that I don't want us to forget is where storytelling begins. Because people gather around your projects,
right.
And that's like they're gathering around a fire. This takes storytelling back to its most fundamental levels. How does that fundamental type of storytelling work for you?
Well, I just was still thinking about what Malenko said. And also the first question about what I think unifies all that we're doing, I think, is that good storytelling redefines perceptions of, in some cases the poor or disadvantaged communities. People of all kinds deserve to have beautiful spaces. And I think when you talk about the poor, you're defining them by what they lack. And if you can tell their story, if you can give them the honor and the dignity of their name and their backstory and their circumstances, then you redefine who they are by what they do have, and they always have a lot. And so I think that's also what that clip really did powerfully. Mm-hmm. So, I'm sorry, I don't know if I answered your second question.
All I have to do is sit here and sound like I'm intelligent, or even sound like I'm stupid. All right, so mega organization, how does this sort of granular level fit in with, you have this huge thing, I drive by it every day on my way downtown, it's bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. And I want I want Broad Street back. I'm tired of it.
I know.
But it's, how do you bring that level of authenticity? I mean, you're doing a really great job with it down there, and how do you bring that level of authenticity into it when it's such a big organization? How does it work in the back halls of that place?
So I think just the word authenticity is a huge one in this. And I think it's one that a lot of organizations struggle with. And I've even noticed in my last position, when you work with some of these organizations, they use the word, which I was kind of uncomfortable with when I got out of journalism and sat down with a bunch of nonprofits, and they used the word message a lot, and things were message driven. How are we getting across our message? And I remember as a journalist, I kept saying, must we always use the word message? I hated the word message, but the interesting thing about it is that stories the individual stories and the stories, I think even recognizing inside the halls of the Gates Foundation, everybody realized that authenticity was essential. And if we could tell real stories about real people, about what was happening, what was working, and even what wasn't working, and the challenges we were facing, that had enormous impact. And the foundation's a data-driven place, and so it spends a lot of time doing research about the work that it's doing out in the field, but it even kind of tries to get a sense of research about what's resonating for people and what's not in terms of what's having impact. And I think what it shows over and over again is that stories about people, about individuals, everybody gets. At a policymaker level down to an individual, when you find an individual story about a human being that's being directly impacted by the work, everyone remembers that. It's that argument back to, 1 million people is a tragedy. No, what is it? 1 million people is a statistic, 1 person is a tragedy, right? And it's back to that notion, and I think that we have started to talk a lot about it isn't just what we do, but it's why we do it, and we have to tell those stories. And because that gets to the emotional factor, because what we've noticed is that if you can connect to people here and not just here, it sticks. So that's something we've been talking a lot about.
Terrific. One of the things, oops, that's kind of close to the microphone. One of the things that inevitably comes up when we're talking about Gates, and actually in your own ways, I would like to sort of get you to address this question, is that, right now, Gates is giving money to your former employers, right? ABC News. One would not think ABC News is necessarily a needy organization. But they also gave money to a photographer named Dan Lamont to go do coverage of homeless families in Washington State.
Yep.
I was a fellow at Seattle University last year, and one of the things that I was impressed with at the time, and I want you to talk about how this functions behind the scenes again, is there were no fingers on the wheel when I was doing my work. And I'm wondering, how do you nuance those issues of bias or of influence peddling when you're funding news gathering, essentially when the partnerships change? How does that work for you guys? And in a faith-based organization, I'm sure it's a very direct relationship, so it would be more interesting to hear what you have to say about this as well.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting area because it's when, you'll see, and I've written a blog about it that's on the Foundation's blog, there's 3 guiding principles when we go about funding and working with outside contributors that we have when we're particularly dealing with news organizations. It's transparent, so we'll tell people, anybody who asks, we give The Guardian in the UK a $2.5 million grant for the next 3 years to cover global development and have a global development blog and do data visualization and all that kind of stuff, and they're out trolling the world for those stories. We respect the editorial independence of the work of who we grant that money to, so it's their call where they go with it and what they want to do with it, and the integrity of the work is essential, and we respect that part of it, which means if you find things that says, wow, not a lot of progress has been made here, even the Foundation's funding there hasn't actually had much of an impact, so be it. The important thing is that I think what people inside the Foundation when I first got there said is they respected the fact that storytelling mattered, that evidence-based content was essential, that we needed to make sure the conversations were happening about these issues, and that those conversations were happening in an informed, thoughtful way. We don't have all the answers. We'd rather the conversation happening than not happening, so if it has to happen in their opposing points of view, so be it.
Terrific. Jane, faith-based organizations, obviously, this is a very personal exercise for all of you who work there and for the people who write the checks to support all of your great causes. What is the implication for a faith-based organization of sort of keeping hands off enough so you have authenticity? Because I know I was at PATH last week, and there were a whole bunch of people there from Gates, there were a whole bunch of people there from your organization. Clearly, you swim in many waters. How do you guys navigate that?
And is that as much about, asking about our identity and not to use the word message, but
It's okay.
because
We're not over it. It's been 3 years now. Stop twitching when we use the word.
So I do. We have got lots going on, big and small, and I think we're very clear on our faith-based identity and how that motivates. And I think that's the key message that we all give, is that that's what motivates the work that we're all doing. But it's really become increasingly important once you see how big poverty is and how it seems like it's mostly going in the wrong direction all the time, that you have to partner with other groups. And we get government grants, we get private grants, we get foundation funding. We have, and then of course a lot of private donors who are, of course, very concerned and very invested in World Vision. And we hear a lot from them now. Social media opened that up, two-way conversation now. Before it was more of a one-way conversation. So that's been really important. And from the communication side, I spoke of blogger and blogger trips, and we've been doing some of that too, where we allow these folks who are not so they're not our staff members to go out there and experience things and then write what they think. And we feel pretty strongly that our work on the field side it will stand up to that. And so far, I think it really has, and it's been a good experience.
So you have buy-in with that because of that broad recognition. What have you found in your 20-some year, kind of 30 almost, 25 years? Yeah. What really works for you in terms of finding that engagement with those small communities? How do you bring them around the campfire?
Well, it's a long story, but when I started, when I talked about collaboration across differences in gathering differences in gathering places kind of idea, nobody knew what I was talking about. It was really a strange idea. And we just had to prove the concept and build something. So we front-loaded a lot of energy in the initial phases of our work. Grabbed few donors here and there and just make it work. Once it was real, physical, people would start to come to us and say, can I have one of those? And that gave us an opportunity to start saying, yes, but here are some principles that we work with. Are you willing to work with those principles? So our basic idea is collaboration. Our organization believes that collaboration is an art form now that is at the edge of our human evolution. That unless we learn collaboration, not just internally, as you're doing here, or between small sectors, but what we see in communities is communities of place. Let me make this clear. We work with communities of place rather than communities of affinity. So communities of place in modern times are gatherings of differences. There's a Somali immigrant who just came here 2 weeks ago, sitting next to a lady who lived in the neighborhood for 40 years. And you go down the line, and different ideologies, religions, tastes, dances, food, fashion, all that now is gloriously mixed in modern cities. What we are working with is that we give an outlet to that energy. At worst, the differences turn into irritations, right? And we are all familiar with that. What we've been learning about is that under certain conditions, and we try to create those conditions, differences become assets, they become gifts. And we start contributing to each other a whole new different way. And so that's one big lesson from our work. Under the right conditions, differences become gifts.
And how does that scale up to a mega organization? What do you think Gates can learn, or from that, or what do you think that Gates should learn from that kind of participation in the community?
There's an integrity of the process of engagement with communities that I think needs to start with saying, you are in charge of the vision and we're here to help you implement that vision. And with that comes a responsibility. Vision is more than a collection of opinions. Vision is a very courageous mental state that asks the question, what ought to be? What can be here? And then I start pulling myself gradually towards that. That's the true meaning of collaboration for me, that we identify a shared image of the future that allows us to collaborate later on. Right now we live in a society that has dozens upon dozens of images of the future, unarticulated, and we fight it out in expressions, but we never have the courage to state, here's where we ought to be going. So we ask people to say, where should your neighborhood be going? What does it mean to be fully grown neighborhood? And then how can this small project be aligned with that goal. And when we accomplish that, then we can we allow ourselves to do tiny little things. These projects are still small by large measurements. They still involve small percentage of people, but it's aligned with that possibility, and that's where the power comes from.
And does that scale?
And I think quality and quantity work hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And for us, it scales up. Now we're working nationally, but it was slow cooking.
Well, I might even submit that you have to have that kind of buy-in because, as you said, the problems are only getting worse. I've been covering this stuff since the 70s, the poverty issue, and it's only gotten worse. So what can we, I mean, we can throw money at things and clever storytelling ideas, but how do we enhance that engagement so that we can, what I love is what ought to be. I think that if we walk out of this 2 days with a mantra, that should be it. What ought to be? How can we make what ought to be?
And then we're all servants to that shared image, and we do what we can with our talents.
I agree, and I think that one of the things in that is the notion of community, and it's something that I think nonprofits have talked about it for some time, where they've talked about community building has been something that they've talked about a lot. I think what they're recognizing is that content and storytelling is a critical part of community building, but it's also back to that notion of engagement, which is if you do it in a collaborative way, if you make sure you're bringing in the voices of the community, of people out there that you're trying to help, of those people who are doing the work, I think all of that's essential. So as you're thinking about, a lot of what we sit around and we talk about and think about is, Bill and Melinda can get all the attention they want when they want to get attention. But what we've struggled with is how are we going to actually bring a greater voice and bring the stories out of the people who we're working with who can't get that attention. Grantees, people who work on the ground on these issues day in and day out, and some of the end beneficiaries, that they all have to be part of that conversation. We all have to figure out a way to elevate their voices. And so part of our storytelling and part of the way you guys can really help work with organizations even like ours is coming up with ways to say, well, I think there's a way to bring these voices out so they can really become part of this conversation, that it can really be a community effort, and there really is a desire to make this a greater community effort.
They were both at international conferences lately where the big talk was an approach called, I think C4D means communication for development.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and that's the idea of lifting up children's voices, community voices. And so that's a big move for World Vision and for other organizations. I think the concern for those of us who are professional content creators and curators is we just want to do it really well. I mean, a real bad video of a kid waving, I think it does have some value, but how much more can we do to deliver that? So I think that's been the tension right now that we're trying to figure out.
I think that all our work is very similar, that we're all learning how to put artistry in our work, because the danger of information only is that it leads to kind of delusion of the familiar in kind of a consensus society now. If I read it something, I've done my part about the issue, kind of thing. And there is a danger in all of this work to just simply toss out ideas, and there's an ocean of important ideas, and when everything is important, nothing is important, kind of situation. And I think what you are doing, and the examples that I saw this morning, and what we are all talking about, regardless whether it's a photo or it's a gathering place, there is an artistry that needs to go to it, to give it a chance to not be leading to kind of information that is just a bite of a sound bite, but information that has a power to transform and create meaning. And I think art, in most broadest sense, is just that process that turns information into meaning. And that meaning can only happen if it's in relationship to existing setting. And because we work with communities, it needs to be in relationship with the communities where we work. Otherwise, we inform strange people in faraway places about what is happening in the community, and we find that to be really dangerous.
Interesting. We've got, of course, we're all turning late. This is the intro way. I'd love to, will you guys take a few questions before we break? We've got, I bet there's a bunch of
Just the 1 minute warning.
Yeah.
He's gonna hide
That's what you
behind.
get for cutting him off.
Yeah, that's right. Russell and I have been wrestling. It's okay, we've got a hand up here.
I don't know if we made it clear, but we're going to have
I know.
an extended Q&A at the end.
We will,
of the
but we got some momentum here, so go ahead.
We're going to have fun. We're going to do this tough.
Russell and I finish each other's sentences all the time. It's really impressive. Okay, sorry, question.
Yes, thanks so much. I really appreciate the focus on the telling the story, and the next step for a lot of us is the behavior change and leading towards behavior change. And that's of course one reason for telling stories. And I wonder if any of you can speak to those who are doing that well and actually getting measurable results from the behavior change that your media is doing. I think for nonprofits in particular, and I run one of them, that this is the next big question for all of us.
A really good question. So it's an interesting. So that here's what I'll say on that one, which is a really interesting one. So back to the engagement first and not second, and a lot of organizations, like there was an organization that one I referenced called Purpose, and they came and visited an interesting group of people, and they said, we think the newsletter is the enemy. And I said, okay. So we talked about that, and I said, why is that? And he said, well, because you haven't told people what they're supposed to do. And so the behavior change part of it is if you're thinking about ultimately what's the outcome or the behavior change you want. Sometimes with some of the media work that we're doing, it's kind of perception change and not behavior change. But what we've noticed in kind of the traditional model, and I'll just digress for 1 second. In the traditional model, as you probably noticed when I got into this, people started talking about you build awareness, there's awareness, will, and then action, right? And so you go along this scale, and you got to make people aware, and then you have to build their will, and then they'll ultimately act. And then gradually what we realized is, that chain is now contracted to almost, that can happen in seconds, right? People used to think, over time we'll build awareness, will, and then people will act. But you take a look at a Coney video and you realize you get awareness, will, and action all in a very short period of time. And at any point when you bail out of the video, there's your chance to act. And so, where people are starting to recognize if you think about what is the behavior change you want first. So, I think there's been some that have had success. When we did some work with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in my last job, but there was very specific actions they wanted people to take regarding, for example, obesity in their diet. So they used content to do that. I think in some ways it's really hard. So, the Gates Foundation tries to use media to create, behavior change in certain places like male circumcision for men to get circumcised in the developing world. They've been able to see some results in that. But a lot of our stuff has been harder, and we've been trying to do perception change because we haven't necessarily articulated that there's a very specific behavior change we want people in the United States or in Europe to do, because we don't know what their direct next action would be to help, and that's an issue that we've always struggled with.
Yeah. Let's share this, but we are going to be addressing this question later in the day too. One of our colleagues from the University of Washington is going to be talking about how do you ask the right questions and how do you measure what are the right things to measure. So quickly, if we can just, and then that'll be our only question.
I was going to interrupt you about that. I was going to tease tomorrow because a lot of what you're talking about is what the workshop tomorrow is about.
That's right. Well, that's actually exactly right. So
and now you got your last 1 minute.
Okay. So you guys each have 30 seconds. You can fight it.
In our instance, behavior change is how many people get involved with a project in their own community that does not benefit them directly, but just benefits everyone else. And sometimes it's thinking that does it, but in most cases it's other factors. It's pity, it's noise. So you get a chainsaw going, and all the boys will come and check it out, and then mothers check on the boys, and they see, and what are you doing? And I think it's much more complex. I think this line is, in my mind, as an artist, it's a little bit false line, that the hierarchy kind of a descent. We find that when bodies get engaged, when you actually do something, the behavior change is much more powerful than when we just think that we need to do it in our consciousness. Mm-hmm. That it works both directions, from top down and from little gritty moments up. And you suddenly realize it. We had a fabulous case when a woman who was completely opposed to anything we would be doing turned out to be the fiercest neighborhood leader, you can imagine, and the change happened in 1 week. And the prompting was when she saw us eating granola for breakfast. And she said, that's not unacceptable if you're going to do all this work. And she brought us breakfast the next day. So pity is as good or more than
Anything you want to add?
I was trying to think more broadly, but then I guess the one little example, or not that small, but the example that we have is about the AIDS pandemic. And I think when we started with that in a big way, and I think it was year 2000, around there, we knew our donor base, which is largely evangelical Christian, were pretty opposed to AIDS as a topic. I mean, there was sexual sin, there was drug use, there were other things in there, and there wasn't a lot of openness. But boldly, so thankfully, our CEO went into it anyway, and specifically to churches and Christians, and it was over the last 10 years, 10, 12 years, it's been amazing because really hearts have changed. And it wasn't just us. I mean, we had Bono, and you had President Bush with PEPFAR. I mean, there was a lot of other things happening. But I think to turn people from one place where they were very, very much opposed to getting engaged with this issue to the example of a church that was putting like all their members out on mission trips and, you know, sponsoring children, and a lot of their mission money was going toward helping a community affected by AIDS. I mean, it was a really kind of inspiring thing to see. So.
And you are an inspiring group of people. That's great.